Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Good to see you all. We've got a large number of people joining us today, actually. I can see people trickling in bit by bit. Uh, Hi, Carol. I can see your message already. Thanks very much for that. So welcome to the next in the CTO Craft Community Bytes series. As you know, we're going to be running these every couple of weeks for the foreseeable. Had a great session a couple of weeks ago with Carol Palambini and Howell Carver and Namar, who were talking to us about what it's like to be a CTO who's become a founder, and that was great. The recording for that is going to be up on campus very, very soon, so keep your eyes peeled if you'd like to take a look at that. This time around, we have some lovely people joining us to talk about technology vision. So with us today, we have Mary Williams. She's an experienced CTO, an author, an international speaker. She led teams of 30 to 300 at so many different organizations. We've got Procter and Gamble, the Government Digital Service, Moo, Helix, Pleo. They're currently coaching and advising technology leaders and investment companies. And they're also the chair at the Lead Dev conferences, which you've probably seen. Very busy indeed. She's also co-running a micro charity supporting women and non-binary people, which is fantastic in STEM. So yeah, welcome, Mary. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We also have Rob Zuber, who is the CTO of Circle CI. He's been a CTO 5 times, and he's been a founder 3 times, but he's been in the industry for about 25 years. Everybody, I think, will have come across Circle CI at some point. They've been a great support to CTO Craft, but they're also massively well known in the continuous deployment and continuous integration world. So great to have you with us. Thanks, Rob.
Good to be here.
And finally, we have Josie Haynes. She's an executive leadership and career coach, but she's also been an engineering leader at Apple, Tile, Zynga, and American Express. So she's been at some pretty incredible companies. I'd love to get some stories about Apple at some point. I've heard varying things, but I'd love to have a chat. But she's built and scaled teams. She's built visions. She earned a technical Emmy, which again, I'm going to have to ask a bit more about that because I didn't know such a thing existed. And she champions women's visibility and advancement in tech. Welcome, Josie. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Good stuff. Okay, so yeah, as I said, we're going to be talking about vision in engineering leadership and why it's important in terms of motivating engineers, alignment with the rest of the business, et cetera, et cetera. Just a reminder, there's a Q&A function. If you look on the far left, there's a little speech bubble with a question mark in it. If you'd like to pose a question to the panel, that's where to do it. Don't do it in the chat, please, because they tend to get lost as people start chatting. So use that one, and then we'll pose it to the panel. But let's get cracking. Okay, let's start with Rob. I'd like to know a bit more about the first time it became apparent to you that you needed to be more explicit about building a vision for the technology team you're in. Can you remember a sort of inflection point?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the quick answer is way too late. I think that's often the point at which we realize things are needed, right? And yeah, I've been at Circle CI a long time, a little over 11 years, which means we from a very small size. And that's when things happen too late because you start small and everyone is super aligned. And there's not like you wake up one day and you realize no one is aligned, but no one's been aligned for a really long time. Unfortunately, it's not like on the day where suddenly there's some misalignment sort of thing. And one of the things that I found really valuable at that point was I sort of put this framework together that I expressed to people around where we were going to invest, where we were going to align, and what we were going to park. Meaning, like, we're actually working on this. Here, if you do something, I want you to be like in the direction we want to go. And please stop talking about this stuff. We know it's bad, but no one's going to do anything about it right now. Like, we can't invest in everything. And a big part of that was like permission in a way. to say, no, we know that's bad, but the company, doesn't matter, have accepted the risk of not fixing this problem or dealing with this thing, because when we make these investments, that's what's really going to move the needle for us and allow us to start to converge on something. And I think that was a big part of where we were starting to drift apart, was people were just worried about different things and trying to invest in different things, and we couldn't do all of them. And so getting more weight behind particular things so that we could move the needle on our overall direction required kind of painting that picture for folks, putting a vision and then some detail about how we approach it, so that, again, we could move the needle on the things that mattered.
Totally, I don't totally hear you on it usually being too late when you start looking at it for the first time. How about you, Mary? Was there a specific moment you can remember?
So at Monzo, they very much had the experience that Rob describes of being a very small, tightly knit team that had agreed all the engineering principles and was very, very aligned on what to build and how to build it. And then I joined at the point that we were tripling the team in a year. And so we were very rapidly in the situation that half the team had been there less than 3 months. And that was much more challenging for people to stay on the same page and to know where to go and why. But the other thing that we found was that we needed to be able to have a conversation with the regulator about where we were going. And so we ended up myself and our chief architect ended up trying to write something that was comprehensible to the regulator, but inspiring to the engineering and product and design and data team. And so that was particularly challenging, I think. So the Monzo engineering principles were already really well known, and not just in the company, but beyond. But then coming in with a technical vision above that and architectural principles was really important at that point. And then my experience since then has been that I tend to go into situations where they know that they need some help, and so I kind of join and try to get a vision together as quickly as possible, because what Rob described of people pulling in different directions and worrying about different things is already happening by the time I turn up as a sort of scaling CTO.
So it's as much about getting people aligned and making sure everybody knows what the actual end goals are at the moment.
Yeah.
Josie, from your point of view, is there? I mean, there is, but what would you say is the difference between having a strategic roadmap and having a vision for engineering? What are the sort of the separators, differentiators?
Yeah, so I look at it at 3 perspectives, right? The vision is like your 2 to 3 year, like this is like where we want to get to. These are the things that we want to be building. This is how we're kind of directionally thinking about it. Then you've got the strategy. And in each layer, you need to make sure you're providing enough clarity that you can, in the deeper layer, get to, is this a yes or is this a no, right? I was just talking to somebody. This was more on like the product side. One of their product pillars was like go to market. I'm like, I can't make decisions off of a product pillar that's go to market, right? Like that's not specific enough. And so your vision has to be, and this kind of ties to the question somebody was asking in the chat, your vision has to serve the product vision, but you do have to have a technical vision of how you're going to fulfill that. So for example, at Tile, it was the middle of COVID. We were about to add a very large subscription feature set to Tile, involving both hardware and software. And we had kind of, because of Tile and how small it was, we had very small teams. We kind of had cobbled it together across different teams. And so it was this very clear need to now look at things much more end to end. And so the technology vision was really around, all right, we're going to really start thinking about things holistically. Then the strategy was, okay, we also don't have all the resources we need to be able to do this. And so we're going to grow the team. I actually got my boss promoted to CTO and created my VP of engineering role to make sure that we actually set up the team successfully to do that. And then we reorged the whole product and engineering organization to do that successfully. And then along the strategy was things like, okay, what are the build versus buy decisions? Like, how do we make those? And so we're not repeating that conversation like over and over again. Like, what's the framework for that? And then finally, when you get down to the strategic roadmap, that's okay, most likely next 6 months, maybe it's a year. Like, what are like the milestones? What are the actual deliverables that are going to get you across those things? And each layer gets more tactical.
Yeah, I definitely see that. It's the difference between knowing where you're going and knowing the tactical parts of how you get there, sort of added together.
Yeah.
So
And
what
vision's also really about why. I forgot to mention that. Like the why is what then drives the what and when.
Mhm. Yeah. So the question is, what comes first, the vision or the strategy? Has anyone been in a situation where the strategy has come before the vision?
Yes, I've definitely been in companies where there's strategy, but either something just too fuzzy as a vision, or um, something changing at the vision level as well. Pleo went through a major mission change during my time there. So we went from trying to make everybody at work feel valued, which was about putting spending decisions in the hands of every employee, to making the finance team feel like superheroes, which was a very different aspiration, I suppose. I think it's very tempting. I think you can live without a business vision, but living without a product vision is very difficult. But it's tempting to try and write a technical vision before you've got a product vision, especially if there's gaps on the product side, or maybe your product counterpart is not somebody who enjoys writing things down, or similar. I definitely at Pleo was lucky. My partner in crime, the chief product officer, was very good at presentations, and so I had to accept that it was going to be a slide deck rather than a document. But there was a proper vision for the offering for the product, and then it was easy to riff off that in order to just find the technical vision.
Yeah. I think that's an important thing we should be covering, isn't it? That there's a product vision which is very tied to what the business wants to achieve and offer customers, and the engineering vision needs to support that. But there are also other things that you should be aiming towards as a technology team around like security and compliance and the size of the team, etc., etc. Rob, from Circle CI specifically, what's the relationship between the kind of the product side and the technology side in terms of creating visions? How much of it is shared and so on?
Yeah, I think the product vision business perspective is always going to inform technical. I mean, what are you building if you're not building the product and delivering for the business? One of the things that I find really interesting in that split, though, and something that we talk about a bit, is one, we have a set of sort of patterns and practices, approaches from a technology perspective that are our philosophy as an engineering team. And if we decided to pivot tomorrow and build a challenger bank, which would probably be pretty nutty for us, but like we would still have those philosophies, right? There are things that are completely independent of the product that we're building. So it's useful for us to write those down, and doesn't take a lot of product inputs. Like, who are we as a team? Who do we want to be as engineers? And then the other thing that I think is really important and driven from the product vision is that from a technology perspective, often the time horizons to execute and realize our vision are much longer on a technical side than they are on a product side, particularly in today's market where, the product is changing from a week to week basis, just based on what's happening in the news, whatever. And so I really encourage technical folks to have a complete understanding, maybe complete's wrong, but at least a perspective on what I describe as the set of possible futures. Like, what are the reasonable things that we might end up being asked to deliver? And when someone from a technical perspective says to me, I don't have concrete enough requirements, so I can't design the technology, I find myself reminding them, we're wrong about our requirements from a product perspective. Like, we don't know exactly what is right and what is wrong, but we know, like, if we were perfect all the time about defining exactly what we wanted to build, we would I don't know, it would be a miracle, right? Like, that's just not how product works. We iterate our way there. We put things in front of customers. We adjust. And when we say, oh, we were wrong about this, and the answer is, well, we didn't build in a way that can support that change, then that's on us from a technical perspective. So really understanding what are all the things that the product team is considering, where do they see this possibly going, is more valuable than this is the one thing we're going to build. Let's drive straight to that. Because again, those time horizons are longer. It takes longer to shift the underlying technology than it does to really shift the product perspective.
For sure. Let's talk about communicating vision. So, or the vision as a translation layer. We've spoken about the difference between the product vision and the technology vision. Obviously, a technology vision should be quite easy to communicate to engineers and technologists, but maybe not other stakeholders, and vice versa, possibly. Mary, any thoughts on this? How do you create something that's universally communicable?
I think I try to write these documents in a way that you can stop reading when it stops being relevant to you. So to Josie's point earlier, that you start with why, and often if you're a product manager or a design leader in my organization, you can just read the why part, because that tells you the real reason that we're going to do everything else. I think then the what needs to be understandable enough that you're not constantly having weird conversations with the CFO about why people are allocated the way they're allocated, or whatever. They need to understand well enough that they're not too freaked out, I suppose. And then I think when you get into the real detail of how and when, I don't think that you need a huge amount of that to be translated into generally understandable terms. I think that's really by engineers for engineers, and by data folks for data folks. And so I think I try to write it so that you can kind of stop reading when it stops being relevant to you. And I got taught that when I was very early in my career at Procter and Gamble. I got told off for writing like a scientist, which I thought was great. I thought it was a real compliment to be told I wrote like a scientist. But I was like describing the problem and then the method and then all the rest of it, and then like the very last thing was the recommendation or the sort of outcome, and got told to flip it upside down and make it so if somebody agreed with your first sentence, they could just stop reading and run with your recommendation. And that was a real kind of aha moment for me early in my career, this different way of writing.
Yeah, sounds very wise. Josie, what about the other way around? How do you take a vision from the product or the business side and translate to the engineers? Is it the same principle? Do you think it needs to be presented with the why first and foremost? How would you approach that?
Yeah, I agree. I would use a pretty similar philosophy, because often, engineers want to make an impact. Very often, that is one of their motivators, and they're going to be much more motivated if they understand why they are building something the way they are. And hey, not that they always agree with the product direction and decisions, but it is usually a motivator to be like, oh, this is where we're going. This is how the thing I'm building is going to impact customers. And then adding to what Rob was saying, of really understanding all of those possibilities, I think that's really important too, to be able to then create a technology vision. And as a leader, I like creating a framework for a vision, and then really having the team help co-create the details. And I think that is really important, especially speaking to, again, something else that Rob had mentioned around, the team norms and values are part of the vision as well. As much as that can be co-created with the team, the more engagement and buy-in that you're going to be getting from the team as they then figure out the how and when.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob, how about you? How do you do that translation? Is the why the most important?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo everything that's already been said, and I do think going that direction to engineer, like in particular, we're basically a product for engineers, so like Circle C, it's really hard to work at Circle CI as an engineer and not be a user of the product. Like I think there are many places where that's possible, right? And you need a lot of sort of translation or sort of let me put you in the shoes of the customer and what they feel like. We have the opposite problem, which is, to Josie's point about engineers agreeing or disagreeing. Like we have very opinionated engineers about how software should get built. And sometimes they disagree with our choice of it. And we have to sort of share, like, not every company works the way our company does. I mean, we're over it now, but that was a problem for us earlier. So absolutely, like helping people understand what's happening in the market, maybe the dynamics. Like this is how this particular type of company operates. Mary mentioned regulatory earlier. Like we're not in a highly regulated industry, but we serve highly regulated industries. So sort of capabilities for them. Those are the places we have to bridge things. I mean, that's not particularly in the vision part, but those are the big gaps we tend to have to fill for engineers. But always here's where we see the market going. This is what we're seeing in the industry right now. This is like understanding that helps so that folks can make the connection. And then I think the other way, at least for me, I always think of it as the responsibility on me to speak and understand the language of my peers. You're sort of talking about just product but CFOs, I forget who mentioned the CFO, like I need to understand financial terms so I can explain to them how these things matter in those terms. I happen to have a CFO that's pretty deep into what we do, but I think it's often a failure mode for engineering leaders to speak in sort of engineering terms about very high level things that are, and sort of fail to help others understand the impact of the business.
Yeah, I think it's almost one of the first skills you have to unlearn, isn't it, as you move up into leadership roles. The framing everything as a completely technical set of challenges or missions.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that's true, and the probably first indicator is who are your peers, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and there's the whole first team challenge, et cetera, et cetera. But like at an executive level, most of your peers are not engineers. That's not how they got really good at sales or at finance or whatever. And so learning their language and how to communicate effectively is a big part of the job.
There you go. Let's talk about tensions between the different visions in a business. So we won't cover all the different functions like finance and marketing and so on, but let's talk about product and tech specifically for a second here. Have any of you been in a situation where the vision for product has veered quite dramatically from where tech would like to go, for example? Anybody got any stories? Mary's grinning.
Mary's always grinning. Yes, but mostly my experience has been where the product vision was just changing too quickly for anything to keep up with it. So I think when I've had a couple of actually CEOs rather than CPOs. The CPOs were generally a bit more understanding that stuff needed to be built between ideas. But I've had some CEOs who, the latest big idea that came to them, they wanted to be this week's priority and didn't understand the tax of change. And that veering from one thing to another meant that we just were never getting any progress and disheartening lots of the team and like lots of sunk cost into things that then were not finished and never got to customers. And I think that was particularly challenging when there was this sort of zigzagging or U-turning or similar. That was tough. At places where the mission is very clear, it happens a lot less. I think when the mission's really clear, it's a lot easier to go, well, hang on, is this really about where we're going as a whole company and as a whole team? I think where you've got a CEO sort of desperately trying to find the thing that will work and flip-flopping between alternative visions all the time, that can be very challenging. But it's also a little bit of a tendency of people who found companies, I think, to have lots of ideas and not to have the patience for them to be executed. And so I've started to think of it as a sort of hazard of working with founders as much as anything else.
Yeah, to add to what Mary was saying there, so I've done both ends of the spectrum, right? I've worked at Apple, coordinating with 30 different teams to build features, and right now I'm founding head of engineer for a little tiny startup, fractionally, which was actually my hackathon project at Tile that's now become a real product we launched last year. And yeah, as founders, not often, but founders occasionally don't actually have leadership experience building products before. And so you're training them how to provide a product vision. And you need to have some flexibility, especially in an early stage company, right when you launched. But you also need to have enough discipline to say, like, okay, these are great ideas, but then this goes back to the vision and my comment about, like, you need to at least have pillars, right? Like, are we doing this as a product-led growth company, and then you might prioritize certain features, or are we going enterprise and you're going to prioritize some other features? And if you try to do too many things too early in a company, while it can feel like, oh, but this opens up the possibilities, you don't have enough team to do that successfully, and you're actually not going to create as good a product as if you stayed opinionated. So I think part of coming in, especially working with founders who also may not have as much experience, is we need to guide them. Like, there's a lot of guiding, providing feedback from, like, I've been doing this for 26 years. Like, here's what happens when you move too fast on hardware design iterations. It's like, hardware is not like software. We can't just, like, give a new build tomorrow. And so also, when you're talking about both hardware and software, like, that also adds even yet another layer of complexity.
Absolutely, yeah. All the prototyping that needs to happen between goes. I suppose it is the holy grail, isn't it? Having a technology, maybe not vision, but a approach that enables those early stage startups to change direction so quickly, isn't it? But it's a very tough thing to get right. Very tough thing. But, yeah. Cool. Let's talk about visibility of visions. How do we make our visions visible, so people can see them, information radiator, etc., etc., and how do we measure our progress towards those visions? Let's start with Rob. Did you have a specific approach to making it visible and tracking?
Yeah, I'm kind of grappling. I'm going to let someone else answer the progress towards, because I feel like visions tend to be more in the North Star kind of direction, right? Like, we know this is generally better than what we were doing before, but are we 8% towards the vision? Like, by the time we're 50%, the vision has changed. The goals of the company have changed. Like, I think that's fine, right? It's more like alignment over some reasonable course. I think visibility, at least for me, it lands in the same sort of set of approaches as the things that you do to drive culture, et cetera. Like you could totally write it on a poster and put it on the wall. Not that anyone's going to an office these days. Or you could, put it on your Confluence page that no one will find, unless you're sort of talking about these things repeatedly. They're part of the feedback process in day-to-day work, whether it's managers in one-on-ones, feedback on PRs, whatever that might be. And then celebrated and, like really sort of publicly talking about these things. They just disappear with everything else, right? Like, people are very limited in what they can sort of keep top of mind. And it doesn't have to be the only thing they're talking about, but if it loses that, oh, you know what, like, I see what you're trying to do here, or we're sitting down to do some design for the next thing, right? Great. We have a ritual that is like, check in on, oh, these are the things we're trying to invest in right now. Does that give us an opportunity to invest in that? What do we know about sort of where we're headed generally? Are we doing a thing that's going to take us away from that, or is it going to take us toward that? Like, it has to be part of the work. Again, the posters and the Confluence pages, there's probably 17 Confluence pages that have not been removed, that have competing versions of the same vision. So when anyone goes looking or asks Claude to read Confluence for them, like, it's going to be different every time. It's got to be ingrained in day-to-day work.
Yeah, so it's repetition. It's embedding it in the day-to-day, I suppose. Do you have any other approaches, Mary? How do you reinforce?
So at Pleo, we wrote the vision together as a tech leadership team, and then we had a section down the bottom which just said, what are the immediate blockers to make this real? And then we listed the most immediate things, and then we would meet in person every 6 months. We're a remote first team otherwise. And then that 6 monthly check-in was really focused around that vision and whether we'd made progress on those blockers and whether we'd made things better. But we also did the sort of roadshow, like Rob describes, of including it in all hands, including it in the staff engineer community discussions, including references to it in the architecture board whenever big decisions were being made, asking people, rewarding people for using the language of the vision and of the engineering principles and the architectural principles when writing their architecture decision records and those kinds of things. I think when some of it is about managers and tech leads and staff plus engineers just being able to go, hey, you seem to be inventing your own new sort of rubric all of a sudden. Why aren't we using this one? That this is the real North Star. This is what we should be referring to, and I think that's important. But yeah, repetition's a huge part of it, and I think having some sort of ritual where you're checking against it and reporting against it. It helped that certainly my time at Pleo and at Monzo, the tech vision had some board visibility, and so having the forcing function of needing to present to the board and to figure out how to measure progress. Some of our aspiration was really to show better velocity and better efficiency, and so we used the DORA metrics and started reporting on those at a board level, and that really helped to sharpen focus as well, because I think when you're every 3 months you've got to get the deck ready and present again, and you better have paid attention to that graph before the 5 minutes before the board meeting. You should have been making sure that it was going in the right direction ahead of time rather than just in the moment, right?
I suppose depending on what's in your vision, if there are specific trackable things or OKRs, it makes keeping the idea of it very present in the sort of the period that you're working in. But otherwise, maybe a bit difficult. What I found is that it always takes more than one person. So certainly when I started this kind of approach, I would sort of go into a room with a couple of the more senior developers and I'd sort of build this long-term vision, long-term being 6 months, right? It wasn't a proper long-term vision, but it was always me that was kind of trying to get everyone to remember this is what we're aiming for. And that was very, very tough. So when I did it in bigger teams and more sort of advanced teams, I had like champions. I had people that I knew were bought into it that would also do the pushing and the reminding and the the visibility stuff, and that helped a lot. But also helps build a bench, I guess, in a way. Yeah. But let's talk about a different kind of tension. We spoke about tension between product and engineering earlier on. Let's talk about the tension between working towards your vision and working towards delivering parts of the product, because they're not necessarily on the same path, right? Josie, anything to say on that?
Yeah, and I think there is a tension, but ideally these are aligned, right? I mean, ideally you're in a place where your technology vision is serving what product you want to be delivering. I think sometimes the thing we need to get around is, I think either Rob or Mary mentioned, like often our technology vision is much longer than the product vision. So for example, I mentioned building a subscription infrastructure at Tile. That was like a year long project. We weren't going to be able to roll that out with the first set of subscription features. So I think part of it, and this is where like the strategy and the roadmap parts come into play, is how do we build this in step-by-step processes, right? Instead of being like, your technology, your new infrastructure is going to show up in a year and a half or 2 years. How do you build small parts of it? Also, it deals with like when you're talking about tech debt or doing a replatforming effort as part of your technology vision so you can scale. The best leaders can really figure out like, how do we break this down so that we don't stop delivery of features to keep building the vision. And then you get alignment from product that we also can't just keep hobbling together delivery features and out the door, because at some point this is going to break for the customers and the team is going to be spending more time fixing things than building a scalable product. So it's really balancing that tension of, yes, often you need to be building and shipping features in a repeatable fashion and cadence, depending on the product. And also, how do you keep making progress on the technology vision and not letting perfect be the enemy of making those steps along the way?
Let's say there is stuff in your vision that is more about infrastructure or team, which isn't directly, it eventually will support the creation of new valuable features and that sort of thing. Mary, how would you persuade how would you sell it to the rest of the business that you needed to have this part of the vision, which wasn't directly right today, we're going to build some new features kind of thing?
I mean, I've done a couple of things. I stole a analogy from Jonas, who was the founding CTO at Monzo and took over again when I moved on. And he used to talk about technical debt as being just like financial debt. It's not a sin. It's not evil to have a mortgage or to buy something before you have all of the cash for it, right? But when your interest payments get too hard to handle, that's when you're in trouble. Or when you're putting the mortgage on a credit card, then you're in real trouble. And that kind of analogy has worked really well to explain to, particularly in a fintech company, most people are financially literate enough that they're like, oh, okay, now I get it. And that helped a lot. I did get to a point at Pleo where we had a monolith we needed to deconstruct, and we realized that maybe we had talked about it too much when we realized that salespeople were telling customers that soon Deimos would be dead. Deimos was the monolith, and that the things would be much faster and better, and there'd be loads more features being released so much sooner. And I was like, okay, we may have overdone this in all hands at this point if the sales folks are talking to customers about our internal tech debt. But I think that's the way that you do it. You make it understandable, and it helps to have that. Many of us have systems these days like Swarmio or DX or similar, where you can track roughly what proportion of time your team is spending on keeping the lights on and bug fixing and toil and that kind of stuff. And the minute you show the CFO that 70% of the team is just keeping the lights on, then it makes immediate sense to them that you want to make that a smaller number and then reinvest the time saved in product features. And so I think that's the big opportunity. I tend to take the roles where that kind of like big tech debt refactoring needs to happen, and that's sort of part of the deal of me joining. Is it's known already that I'm going to have to do some of that and that we're going to have to make room for it. But I also agree with what was said earlier, that you don't want to kind of go off in the corner and just do tech debt, right? You have to keep delivering for customers, you have to keep delivering features. But in an ideal world, you're not talking about tech debt or investments in your technical roadmap in a way that makes it sound like it's all just a pursuit of technical elegance. You want it to be for customers, right? You want it to be fast for customers, secure for customers, and so on. And so I think some of the art of this is to constantly bring back what the benefits are going to be to our customers and to our company, rather than just getting stuck talking about the tech side and not drawing the, I think some people, because they understand the implications, they don't spell it out for other people. I think you have to very actively spell out, like, this matters for this reason, and if we fix it, then this will be better. You can't just sort of leave it to the reader to make those connections, because that relies a little too much on depth of engineering understanding, which isn't fair on folks who are not engineers, right?
Absolutely, yeah. The more we talk about it, the more it seems you can create a vision, but you also have to be a seller of that vision as well. So it's almost a marketing, PR, sales kind of process, isn't it? Once you've actually created it.
One of the best trainings I ever went on when I was at P&G in my early career was one about influence, and it was this sort of like, it shouldn't have been such a shock that I was diagnosed as autistic late in life, but it was a real shock to me that logic wasn't the only way to persuade people. And being taught that there were these other modes of influence, that you can, paint a picture of the beautiful future, you can understand what the other person needs and bridge and try to find the kind of way to find a compromise between you. You can set expectations really clearly. You can articulate the benefits really well. Like, all of these different ways of influencing people were genuinely, like, young Mary had no idea that anything but logic was needed, and it was really, really helpful that I was growing up in what was essentially the company best known for brand marketing in the world, and so definitely stole a load of the techniques that the marketing and sales folks used, and have used it throughout my career to try and make it not just a very dry logical argument every time that you have to invest in these things.
Yeah, I think that there are so many of these very non-technical skill sets which are so important for not just vision, but like strategy and team building and culture and so on, that I think as technologists, we're not naturally drawn towards, like selling and influence and storytelling and all that sort of stuff. But,
I think it's I think it's a great call out, particularly for technical people, right? Like, just salespeople, as they become leaders, tend to have those skills at hand, right? Along with their expertise in their business. But I think that's a huge transition. And one of the things that I always think about in that is, like, if I'm not getting what I want, which is not, like, the goal is not what I want, the goal is the best thing for the business, right? But if I believe the best thing for the business is not landing, that's feedback to me, whether anyone gave it to me and said, hey, Rob, I'm going to give you some feedback. Like, they don't, but I should be listening for that and saying, something about the way I'm communicating this isn't landing, something about the language I'm using isn't landing. That's on me to figure out, how can I help people see where the challenge is for the business. It's not like, and I think most execs are not like this, but it's something most people learn in their career as they grow, and will cap them. I'm not being micromanaged. People aren't being unreasonable. I'm failing to provide what they need in order to make the right decision for the business, or what I believe to be the right decision for the business. Or maybe I'm missing something. I should also be looking for that, right? Like, maybe that person understands something that I don't, that makes this not a priority right now, or maybe not the right thing to do for the business. Like, I need to pay really, really close attention in those moments to what I'm missing and what they're missing.
It's such a juggling act, isn't it? We have to not only be technical enough to know that what we're aiming towards is the right thing, but we also have to be salespeople and be able to sell it, and so on and so forth.
I also just want to pick up on something great. Sorry to interrupt you, Andy. Something great that Rob said earlier about how, the what type of engineering team his team are would stay the same if they pivoted and worked on a different product. Because I think that's another part of vision that we don't always talk about as openly, but, like, there is the vision of what type of engineering organization you are, and what type of career growth you're offering, and what kind of, like, how are people going to become better at their craft by being in your company. And I think that's also a big part of the vision that you set as the CTO, or as a senior technical leader, that is not as concrete, right? It's not as detailed or as concrete or as easy to write up in a document or a slide deck, to say that, this is who we're going to be. But I think it's a really important part, because sometimes the technical vision will change, the product vision will change, but if you can keep that vision of your culture really clear to people, then it can still be very attractive for people to join, but also for people to stay and to grow.
Absolutely.
And to add to what Mary was saying, right now, that is so crucial with effectively rolling out AI in your teams, because we all know you can use AI to code faster, but there's a lot of implications to that in the whole software development lifecycle. And a lot of the research, if you look at like multitudes and DX, is showing that so much of this is a leadership challenge. And if you set a clear vision that the top thing is quality, with we deliver quality, we deliver small pull requests where the engineers know what the code they're submitting is doing, and you're enabling other engineers to push back and say, oh, hey, this PR is like huge, I'm not going to review it, right? That goes to like rewarding the good behavior and allowing that to happen. You're going to have much more effective rollout. So I think right now we're at an injunction point where having this like team culture vision is crucial for success in our teams.
That's a great point, actually. I know we haven't sort of described what a vision's different components are, but I think the culture part, not including stuff like team size and team building and where we want to get to in terms of how much stuff we can do in parallel, but in terms of where we want the culture to be, quite often gets left out of visions, doesn't it? So yeah, that's something to bear in mind. Let's run a scenario. I love running scenarios. Let's say we've created the technology vision and it includes culture. It's been stress tested. It aligns with the product vision and the company vision. One of your most senior people within the technology team is pushing back hard. They really don't get it, and they really don't want to work towards it. What do you do? Start with Rob. How would you approach that situation?
I was Mary looked so ready to jump in. I was like, oh, thank goodness. Thank goodness. Okay. I mean, it's particularly in companies that have scaled. It's not an uncommon scenario, right? Like companies are very different when they're small. Senior people kind of do, well, everybody does a little bit of everything, and then you sort of get more siloed and more specific, and your influence goes down as you grow. And so I will just say it's not an uncommon scenario. That doesn't make it an easy scenario. I would say I'm fortunate enough, or maybe have invested, I don't know, can't give everything to chance, to spend a lot of that time talking to those senior folks in advance, and I know them well enough to know kind of their positions and stuff. And I know also what their motivations are, right? I mean, Josie's point about culture, or actually, I forget if it was Mary's, about who do we want to be and what are you trying to, like, what are you going to develop while you're here? Like, those motivators of individuals are very valuable, right? In that kind of scenario. And so I guess first, if you know your people well enough, you're probably not going to put the vision out and share it with the whole company and then have them reacting. Like that's not a great scenario. You didn't describe that. Is this before or after we did the roadshow? I would advise getting the information and the feedback, and who those people are before. And then, I mean, one of my favorite expressions that I can't cite at the moment where I picked it up from, but is find the most believable person who disagrees with you and understand why, right? Like that might be a really, really valuable piece of feedback. They might just be having a really bad day. And separating those two things is really valuable. And what I want, certainly in my position, is my most senior people to tell me what's broken about the thing that I'm trying to do. Because where else am I going to get that from? It's not going to be my most junior ICs, right? And so yeah, I don't know if I totally dodged it, but I do think, investing in those people before you're trying to roll out something as big as this, getting feedback before you've, presented to the company or whatever, like, I've made all those mistakes before, and knowing people well enough to know what their motivators are to understand, how you could get them on. But sometimes they're just going to disagree, but there's something about what they're doing and what they value that will help you get them on board and to provide support, I would say.
You're totally right there to call me out. I said it was stress tested. It obviously wasn't. But yeah, totally. And I think the most important thing I've just taken from your answer there, Rob, is in the order in which you communicate the vision and the people that you inform at which times is very, very key. If you have someone who is that senior and influential, they're going to have to be much earlier in the communication loop, aren't they, to get feedback.
One of I laughed and was ready to jump in, partly because when one of the major changes I made quite early at Pleo was to go API first, which sounds like a fairly bland thing to say. I did not expect that to result in revolution. But there was a particular engineer who just didn't understand why we would want APIs within the company, and I had to and what I found actually was I had included the people who I thought of as the most influential of the staff plus engineers in the initial writing of the strategy. We'd done a workshop and we'd invited them in along with the directors and above and on the management side. And the real win for me was it wasn't me arguing with this individual. It was those ICs who then went, what are you talking about, dude? This is why this matters so much. And a lot of their pushback was because they were wishing for an earlier stage of the company where you didn't have to have clear interfaces between teams, and it actually ended in them eventually leaving the company because they realized that they wanted to be somewhere earlier stage where you didn't have to formalize how teams were going to work together by having proper standards and APIs between them. And they wanted to be in somewhere a little more scrappy and a little bit earlier stage. But it absolutely was useful information that they objected. But it was also very useful that it wasn't me fighting them. It was the other ICs that were really leading the charge on saying, no, this is absolutely what we need to do. And I think one of the bits of art of setting this kind of strategy is to know who is the most influential in your organization despite their title. Sometimes it will be your most senior engineer or your principal architect or your whoever, right? But sometimes it's the person who everybody goes to because they're just brilliant at explaining things, and that person might not have a title that goes with that capability, right? So knowing what the kind of hidden network is that permeates your organization is really important.
And then another thing I'd touch on is any argument you might have with somebody or any difficult conversation, start with acknowledging that, I think sometimes we do have these senior engineers. I literally have one in the top of my mind who would disagree with every single thing that was proposed. And it wasn't because he wanted to just be argumentative and difficult. He truly cared. And I think sometimes we jump to the fact of oh my gosh, he's coming back again with another debate. But you want, like Rob was saying, you want people to be debating these things. And sometimes we have to teach them how to do this in a constructive fashion, so it's not derailing the entire team. And that's coaching and mentoring them on how to effectively give this feedback. But I think leaning into I acknowledge that you're giving this, even if we're not in agreement on what you're debating here. Let's start with an acknowledgement that I realize you're coming to me because you truly care, because it often is truly from a place of caring, deep belief that they're coming with this.
Yeah, you just reminded me of something that I think I learned from one of my comms folks, or the way that they say it. But once you stop hearing the feedback, that's when you've lost, right? If you get a bunch of negative feedback and you do nothing about it, trust me, your vision has holes in it. I don't care who you are. And when everyone's just oh, whatever, no one listens, there's no point in giving feedback, this is not worth my time, and it turns into the grumble network of DMs instead of the feedback to you, now you have a real problem. Right. The problem of people giving you direct feedback is a fantastic problem compared to that.
Yeah.
That fear of conflict on the pyramid from the 5 dysfunctions of a team, I think is very relevant there, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. I think that we also touched, I think Mary touched a little bit there on the importance of vision in motivating people. And if people aren't motivated by the vision, then it being a good indicator that potentially they're not quite in the right team or not quite in the right place. So it can be good as a kind of forcing factor, can't it, for knowing whether you've got the right people in the right places.
I can also tell you that your vision's shit, right? If you've got an organization of 250 engineers and 230 of them think it's bullshit, then you've got the problem's probably the vision rather than the team. But yeah, I think it can cut both ways. Yeah.
Indeed. Cool. Okay, we're coming up to the end. We do have a couple of questions from Carol. There's one here specifically for Mary. So I'm going to pop this one up. So for Mary, how do you reward people for using the visual language? I think this is in relation to the stuff we were talking about in terms of how you communicate and how you repeat and so on.
So some of it is quite personal. So I will DM people and recognize it and just say, hey, I really appreciated that in your ADR that you brought to the architecture board this week that you were referencing the broader vision and that you're making such progress towards where we're trying to go by doing it. So some of it's one-to-one, some of it's in a team setting, just sort of recognizing that. I think that it's something that can come up in things like calibration, where you're talking about promotions for engineers and that kind of stuff as well. Is how well are they not just articulating what they want to do, but also how it fits with the broader organization and with other teams. And I think that you can do all of those things. But the thing that's probably the most impactful is the quick DM to just say, hey, thank you for doing that. I really appreciated it. I think that's the thing that sticks with people the most.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. How about everyone else? Do you have any specific ways that you reward people consciously or unconsciously for kind of keeping the vision at the top of people's minds?
Well, I think it goes to the example I was giving earlier, right? So are you recognizing and rewarding people for the right behavior, right? Right now, often I'm seeing people being rewarded for like use AI. Well, that's going to potentially be contrary to a vision of we want quality first, right? And so it's both of the recognizing that then, but if you let people create crazy PRs with AI slop, then you're not actually rewarding people for that aligning with the vision. So I think it's looking at it like holistically. Are you saying, and then let's say somebody is creating great PRs, like you can recognize, oh, hey, this is an example of what we want our PRs to look like. And I think really rewarding people for aligning with the vision is really important for your platform teams too, because I think sometimes it's easier for like the product to delivery teams to be recognized for, oh, hey, you delivered this thing that aligned with the product vision. And yet, at Tile, for example, we had a backend team that kept our lights on with like very like a tiny downtime for like over a year, and nobody was acknowledging that's even more amazing than them fixing fires quickly when a fire came up. And so I think it's really recognizing, okay, you want to recognize the positive behaviors as well, even on what might not be considered quite as visible externally too, and really taking some time to think about, hey, how am I rewarding and recognizing this vision on a regular basis? And for your other leaders who report to you, how are you rewarding them and recognizing them championing this to their teams as well? Because especially for folks who are junior into management or leadership as tech leads, the fact that you have to repeat this vision so many times doesn't come naturally, right? Like you have to reinforce it. You most likely want to be sick of telling your vision, and then somebody's most likely just hit it for the first time in their like brains. And that is not a natural behavior. You're feeling like I'm just boring people. Engineers don't want to hear this more than once.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I totally agree with all that. I will just throw out as we wrap up, don't forget the other side of that. I don't want to be super negative, but and I'm keep quoting things I can't remember. It might be from Extreme Ownership, this notion that it's not what you preach, it's what you tolerate. And so when everyone is ignoring the vision, like you need to do something about that, right? And whether like vision is hard to act on in a way, but you know, when you've said, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to standardize around this thing, the people who are like, I think I would be better if I did it this other way. You know, you need to stamp that out pretty quickly, or else that spreads.
Yep.
Yeah, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept, I think, is the quote from it. It's a New Zealand military leader, but it's very, very true. I agree.
Yeah.
You can't let it slide if people are countering it or ignoring it.
Absolutely. Okay, we have reached the hour. We could go on for quite a long time, I think. I was going to ask a question about good books or resources that people have, but maybe if you could post something in Slack, if there are good things that you've come across that people can read up about the creation and storytelling and rewarding and motivation and so on and so forth.
I was going to say the same thing as Mary, so I think yes, you're going to get a lot of that. A lot of good strategy, bad strategy.
Yeah, agreed.
There's also a book called Our Iceberg is Melting that's all about John Cotter's theory of change management, which is much easier to read than everything else he's written about it. It's about penguins. It's great.
Excellent. Okay, anything with penguins, I think is going to work for me. Good stuff. Thank you so much, everyone. I really enjoyed that conversation, but we'll be back in a couple of weeks. I'm going to paste everyone's LinkedIn details into the chat so you can connect with everyone who's been on the panel. Thank you very much, everyone. We will see you again very soon. Let's end there.
Awesome.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.